So 24087, maybe from a quick historical perspective, right, is that we saw the code requirement go in for where breakers didn't have an instantaneous function. That was the first aspect of the code revision. Well, most of modern day circuit breakers have that function, so may have not had a big implication with regard to the first time it was in the code in the code. The second time we came around and we actually implemented a reduction requirement, right? So in the 2014 NEC, we actually have a list of items, right? There's 4 items, and then there's an equivalent means that can be used there. And so people begin to understand this equivalent means and looking at the instantaneous aspects of the breaker. Well, why can't just the instantaneous aspect that's incorporated in the breaker serve this function? And so that became a debate and a dialogue and being used in that equivalent means. So this code cycle, we've introduced that language to say the instantaneous trip or the instantaneous override that's built into the breaker can serve that function. So, right, what are we doing? We're calculating, we have a performance requirement though now in this part of in these new requirements where we have to actually do the calculation for the available arcing fault current. So we actually have to find that arcing fault current and make sure that that instantaneous level of the overcurrent device will pick up that particular arcing fault current level. And so there's some performance requirements that have to be done, but if you do your homework, right, we do your homework, we may be able to apply the overcurrent device as it sits without any other relays, without any other optics, without other types of reduction maintenance means to be put on there. Now, keep in mind that this wasn't intended for the instantaneous to be moved up and down with regard to doing maintenance, okay? That's really what that reduction maintenance switch does, right? When we engage it, it drops it lower. We turn it back, we disengage it, and it brings it back to a level for the consulting engineers who have set the coordination studies, right, and established where all those settings need to be placed. And we don't want to put the performance of the building in question by moving that up and down when we're doing maintenance on things, right? We could put a hospital or something at risk by doing some of that. I do recognize that there are some industrials that I think do that as part of their overall work safety, work practices that have that as pre-existing capabilities that they could go in and do that. But that's not the intent of this particular requirement. This particular requirement was to be used in areas like, I'll give you a quick example, multifamily, right? Multifamily installation where I have a 1600 amp main feeding a number of apartments or other types of small occupancies. And maybe we could actually set that instantaneous, comes from the factory, right? Set at its minimum. And so a lot of people probably don't even realize that, and it's setting there at its minimum. And as long as they do the calculation to understand that that arcing fault current is above that instantaneous level, there's really no additional work no additional equipment that needs to be integrated as a part of this requirement. So, you know, from a consulting engineer, be aware of this one because, right, you have to think about, am I bidding against another person with regard to that might apply this, and you didn't do your homework to do that calculation, right? So I think the consultant needs to be aware of all these tools and all of these particular requirements to make sure that they retain their competitiveness with regard to these areas.
Yeah, I think it's going to require some engineering judgment in its application. Certainly if you look at the wording in the code, you could almost say that, you know, this does let me dial down, but I'm sure that was not the intent of Code Making Panel 2 to permit somebody to come in there and play with that dial, and restoring it to whatever level it was supposed to be set at originally can't be done by dialing back. I mean, that should be tested and to assure the performance that was engineered is going to be achieved.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
Yeah, it does address a key approval though, because in the 2014 NEC, these installations fell under this sort of nebulous approved equivalent means, and this code changes to allow instantaneous really sort of close that gap.
Provides the recognition, right, for it to be used.